Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So this is part of like a little mini series that I've been doing with my new partners Velo. I've also had a bike fit over at their facility, their experience center, and this is sort of like the third installment of that, which is a lab test. But I think it's interesting, and you know, maybe it's something that you might consider in the future. You can now actually book slots for lab testing, so you can learn more about yourself in a lot more detail over at Velo's facility. So yeah, I'll put the relevant links down below. And I'm gonna give you like brief overviews, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit about like my testing and my results from like a fairly sophisticated, detailed lab test. But to be fair, it's important to stress that we only just like scratch the surface of this. Like what I learned, the sheer amount of stuff that we can pull and get from this is incredible. First of all, thank you, Mum and Dad, for giving me some handy genetics. I always thought of myself as someone that worked very hard and was just very consistent over 10 plus years in this sport. So what you're about to hear maybe during the results and everything else later, just take it with a pinch of salt. A lot of it comes down to genetics, but also a lot of it comes down to what you do with that. So I do want to give you some practical things to take away from this video as well. It gives you some kind of idea of what you could expect if you were to book a test there, or if it's something that interests you and something that you want to delve deeper into. So let's just peel back the layer first. Everything was sort of set up in the bike fitting room, which kind of made it feel like it wasn't a lab test, but it felt like it was more sort of, it felt like it was more fun than a lab test. Like it felt like I was in an environment that made me very comfortable. I didn't feel like I was going into a setting where like in a university or in a real lab, like I was getting like sort of scrutinized and like put under the microscope. We actually started with some very basic biometrics. So blood pressure, height, weight, and body fat.
So for body comp, especially for bioelectrical impedance, it's quite sensitive to changes in like your physical state. For example, like how hydrated you are, so in terms of hydration levels, etc. Training, recent training sessions, etc. To make sure all the measures are as consistent as possible, we're going to follow. So we're going to have 7 minutes of steady state at the start of the protocol, where we'll let you self-select your cadence. From there, we'll go up in 25 watt increments every minute, and then you're just going to keep going for effectively as long as you can.
So 500 is the target.
That's what we're aiming for.
500 big ones. What you'll find if you end up booking a lab test or bike fit, you'll find that the guys there are extremely friendly and accommodating, and just want to be involved and just really enjoy that process. The unit itself that was doing all the measuring, I do have a clip here of it. From what I gather, like extremely like accurate, or extremely sort of, it's being used for exactly what it was made to do. It's used in other environments, but not to the extent at which it can be used for things like this and performance testing. So like I said at the start of the video, we just like barely scraped the surface in terms of testing, or at least sort of outcome measures. We are working together in trying to sort of give you guys like the best value for money that you can receive from like the testing and everything else, and like what you can take away from it, and how that can actually benefit you. Because at the end of the day, this sort of stuff can be like really daunting. Lots of us require different levels of, you know, information, and the actual test itself was fairly simple. It was sort of like a ramp test. So every minute of the test, the intensity would increase by 25 watts. And I had a very short warm up there as well. And the warm up consisted of riding at about 100 watts at a self-selected cadence. Now, once I chose that cadence, which was something like 82, 83 RPM, yeah, I'm being very specific with that. what happens then is you have to then try and maintain that cadence. And as the intensity obviously picks up, then the harder that cadence becomes. Those of you that train indoors, which I know a lot of you do, it's like having erg mode on and you're like constantly fighting it. But instead of having like the spiral of death where, you know, you can't sort of maintain that cadence and you keep pedaling until it gets to like 40 RPM and then you stop. What actually happens with this is Hayden pulls the plug. As soon as you drop below 5 RPM from what you were sort of sitting at, bang, pulls the plug.
Okay. Perfect, you did a great job. Keep going, just keep focusing on the 80.
So this test actually gave me some really handy, straight off the bat information about my training zones, based on my ventilatory thresholds. Wow, I'm glad I managed to say that first time. Ventilatory threshold. So the ventilatory threshold is determined from ventilatory changes that reflect trend changes in your CO2 extraction, O2 consumption, and the breathing volume and rate. This trend is correlated with the lactate threshold, where we collect blood samples at progressively higher intensity levels. For example, an extremely deconditioned person may reach his or her VT1 while just walking. So how this sort of testing can help improve your training efficiency versus just sort of power zones, and this is a little bit of a key takeaway here, is like power is always generated by a combination of energy systems. It's the sort of the analogy of like, it's not just a flick of the light switch where you go from like zone 2 to zone 3, I'm talking power zones, or zone 4 to zone 5. It's not just a flick of the switch. Zones based on power testing are typically generalized. So we always say VO2 max training is at 110, 120% of FTP. I mean, you're gonna be pretty close, but with this, you know you're gonna be hitting the nail pretty square on the head.
That's a great test.
You only had one more step left.
Yeah, I know. Do you know what?
I was thinking, well, if you complete
when I laid the protocol out, I thought I'll add in plenty of steps. We'll have loads. It'll be fine. You got to about 3 steps from the end, and I was like, I don't even breathe there. You were like, okay, there. You feel alright? Yeah. Okay, perfect.
I find the same thing with ramps. Ramp tests. I'm like, good. All of a sudden, bang.
Often you get to that point, and you're like, I feel alright. I feel okay. I can keep going. I'm going really good, and then all of a sudden it's just that click. That's kind of what we're looking for. Then we lay on top of that, obviously power, heart rate, perceived exertion scales and stuff, so we've got loads of information we can now feed back into your training. Test's not nice, is it? But it's not
disgusting.
It's not too, I think there's worse tests out there, like Wingate.
So let's move on to like some of the things that we learned from like my personal testing. And I think that'll give you like quite a bit of insight into what we can get from this sort of testing. So the patient, that's me, performed a maximum exercise test of 449 watts and reached a VO2 peak of 4.2 litres per minute. This is above the normal value, 2.87 litres per minute, by 146%. The relative maximum oxygen uptake, VO2 per kilogram, is 68 millilitres per minute per kilogram. Bit of a plateau.
Yeah, that knows exactly that. That's what we were looking for. That's what I said before. So to get a true max, we want to see this plateau here. So if we got to this point here, we'd look at a VO2 peak opposed to actual VO2 max result. So a VO2 plateau shows that we've hit a point where physiologically you can't exercise any harder for the resistance and the power output basically that you're producing.
It also goes on to say that the VT1 is 2.73 litres per minute, or 45 millilitres per minute per kilogram. This is 95% of the normal maximum oxygen uptake, or 65% of the reached maximum oxygen uptake. Now granted, I know this is getting quite deep, bear with me, hopefully I can explain. So like I said, we scratched the surface of what we can learn from this lab testing. There's more to it, and we do actually have plans to do more later in the year when I'm actually in a whole different training phase. Less so for this sort of threshold work that I've been doing, but more so when I'm doing the hill climbs and all-out efforts. Sort of the efforts you do typically sort of correlate to VO2 max training. And it would be really interesting to compare what we've learned now and what we learned then. And as far as I'm concerned, like, there's not many people that share this sort of stuff, and I really don't know why, because it's extremely awesome stuff. Like, we can share, we can learn, and we can all be better humans because of stuff like this. So I got sent through a PDF which looks a lot like this. It has like, it's very visual, which is great for me. I like to see sort of colors, I like to see graphs, charts. So we got a performance assessment page where what I can see on here is things like where my VT1 and VT2 sit. Not just heart rate wise, but also power wise. Here's more graphs here for you. So a lot of you are probably interested to know about that VO2 max value. VO2 max is really important to understand that it gets thrown around a lot nowadays, a lot like FTP. But just like FTP, it's not really about the size of the number, it's more about what you can do with the number. My recovery power zone is anywhere up or below, anything below, sorry, 205 watts. We learned that my VT1 is considerably high. So I'm able to ride at 230 watts, or 233 watts to be exact, or 3.9 watts per kilogram. That's my turning point. As soon as I go over that, I'm starting to produce more lactate, and hence the turn point, and I start to go into VT2. Now when I came into this lab test, I tried to sort of take out all sort of pre-existing thoughts about like what I thought I knew, what I thought was right, what I thought was wrong, so I could really come into this with a sort of a blank canvas to learn from. Most of my training has actually been around the top end of VT2 for the last probably 8 to 12 weeks. Like the top end of VT2 for me is about 390 watts, which is actually what we averaged for that 20-minute time trial I did the other day. And it's also because what I'm training for is also going to be around that area as well. It's worth noting that I've probably done about 4 sessions in the last 12 weeks where I've gone over 400 watts for any sort of considerable amount of time. So any sort of effort where I've gone really deep into my reserves, it in a sense creates a larger zone, but my VO2 max, or my ability to work at a high level of my VO2 max, is not necessarily as good as it could be right now. But that doesn't necessarily matter. What was really cool about this was like my zones matched up really well. So at the minute my FTP is around the 375 watt mark. My zone 1 power using the 6 zone power model actually ends at 205 watts, but my VT1 ends at 230 watts. So there's only a 25 watt difference there. Now my actual zone 2 power starts at 205 but ends at 270, 280. The downside of that though is that I could be fooled into thinking that like more is better with zone 2, and I could be riding at like that 260, 270 watt thinking that I'm getting better adaptation, better stimulus, better this, that and the next thing, but actually I'm riding in VT2, which is going against sort of what my body's physiology is actually trying to achieve. It's really cool learning this like just before the Mallorca 312 event, which is obviously this weekend, well tomorrow actually, this video is going up on Friday. So it's going to be really interesting to debrief a little bit in the 312 video, talking about how I felt and if I was actually able to pace the sort of second half of the 312. After having my first lab test, I can obviously see the benefits of it. I can obviously see where it can give, you know, both riders and coaches and teams the confidence and the motivation as well to train and to have an understanding of where they're training, why, and why it isn't always necessarily about more. We have multiple parameters to go off, and I've also now got practical personalized training zones that I can now use going forward to help me trust my own process better, and to help me internalize and keep coming back to, it's always me that matters, not that person and their FTP and their VO2 max. Like, this is what I have, and this is what I'm going to try and use to make myself better. It seems daunting when you look at the science. It seems daunting when you read all these abbreviations, and you know, it's sometimes it can just be too much and you just want to ride your bike. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for riding my bike. But when you have the data to tell you when you're doing the right thing, when you're doing the wrong thing, when to take it easy, when to go hard, it makes things a lot simpler, a lot clearer, and it does make just riding your bike actually easier. So that's going to conclude my lab test, or at least round 1. Stay tuned later in the year for round 2. Thank you so much, Velo, for helping me make this video. Thank you for giving me the opportunity and the experience and the package. That's going to be it. Thank you so much for watching this video. And like I said, the lab testing is now available. I'll leave the links down below in the description. You can check them out. But that's going to be it from me, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.